Theater has always been a place of illusion, a world where actors step into roles that blur the line between life and art. But what happens when that line disappears completely? Imagine sitting in a packed theater. The lights dim, the curtain rises, and you're swept into the story only to realize that what you've just witnessed isn't part of the script at all. For centuries, the stage has demanded everything from its performers, their talent, their passion, even their lives. And in rare, chilling moments, some actors never make it past their final act. These are not urban legends. They're true stories when the audience applauded, thinking it was all part of the show, while in reality, they had just watched someone's last breath. Tonight, we step into the darker corners of theater history. We'll uncover the tragedies that unfolded under the bright lights, the eerie coincidences, and the haunting legacies left behind. These are the stories of stage performers who gave their very last performance in ways no one expected. Stay with me, because once you hear how it happened to one of the greatest playwrights in history, you'll never look at a theater curtain call the same way again. The Old Legends Theater has always carried whispers of mystery. Long before bright spotlights and velvet curtains, when stages were lit only by flickering candles, the drama unfolding wasn't always confined to the script. Some actors carried their roles to such extremes that they never made it past the final bow. Take, for instance, one of the most famous names in all of theater history, Molière. You probably know him as the French playwright behind biting comedies like Tartuffe or The Misanthrope. But Molière didn't just write plays, he performed them. And in February of 1673, he stepped onto the stage for what would become his final performance. The play that night? Le Malade Imaginaire, the Imaginary Invalid. A satire about a man obsessed with illness and doctors. And there, in front of a Parisian audience, Molière, already sickly, already coughing blood behind the curtain, played the role of a hypochondriac. The irony is almost unbearable. A man pretending to be dying, while his body betrayed him for real. He collapsed on stage. The crowd thought it was part of the show. Somehow, he finished his performance and was carried home, still in costume. Hours later, he was gone. Paris mourned, but the church refused him a Christian burial superstition against actors lingered even in death. And so, the legend of Molière's final performance was born. But Molière wasn't the only one to collapse in tragedy. Nearly 2 centuries later, another titan of the stage fell under eerily similar circumstances. Edmund Kean. His name carried weight in the 19th century England. Known as one of the greatest tragedians of his era, Kean was the very definition of Shakespearean passion. And in 1833, in London's Covent Garden, he performed one of his most famous roles, Othello. As he strode across the boards, delivering the lines he had recited hundreds of times before, something went wrong. His breath faltered. His movements slowed. In the middle of the performance, Kean collapsed into the arms of his co-star, his own son. The audience thought it was a dramatic flourish, part of the act. But it wasn't. Kean was carried from the stage. He never returned to it again. Weeks later, he died. For a man who had lived for Shakespeare, it felt almost written into destiny that he would collapse on stage in the middle of one of the bard's darkest tragedies. Still, neither Molière nor Kean left behind the kind of haunting folklore that came from Melbourne, Australia, in 1888. The opera that night was Faust. The role was Mephistopheles, the devil himself. The actor, Frederick Federici, an Italian-born bass baritone beloved by audiences. The scene demanded something theatrical, a trapdoor descent, as though vanishing into hell. But Federici never made it off stage alive. just as the stage swallowed him into darkness, he suffered a fatal heart attack. The crew rushed to him beneath the boards, but it was too late. Above ground, the audience erupted into applause, believing the performance had gone perfectly. And here's where the story tilts from tragedy to legend. Moments later, Federici's castmates swore they saw him walk back onto the stage for the curtain call. They felt his presence, standing among them. The crowd cheered. Only later did they discover the truth. Federici was already dead. To this day, the Princess Theatre in Melbourne whispers about his ghost, forever returning to take his final bow. From Paris to London to Melbourne, the stage had already claimed some of its brightest stars. And if you thought these were just strange accidents of history, think again. The 20th century would bring an entirely new wave of performers, men and women, who collapsed mid-performance, leaving stunned audiences unsure if they were watching art or death unfold in real time. The Golden Age tragedies. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, the theater world had grown grander than ever. Opera houses rose like cathedrals, theaters gleamed with chandeliers, and performers lived like celebrities. But with grandeur came pressure. And sometimes, the stage demanded more than just applause. In 1897, the Metropolitan Opera House in New York became the setting of another grim finale. French bass Armand Castelmary was in the middle of performing Martha, a comic opera. His rich voice filled the hall. But then, silence. Castelmary collapsed mid-performance. The audience thought it was part of the staging, only realizing something was wrong when the curtain abruptly dropped. He was carried backstage, where he died. The Met had witnessed many great performances, but this was one it wished it could erase. 4 decades later, in 1938, tragedy struck again, this time in Santa Barbara, California. Actor Joseph Greenwald was performing in Golden Boy. The play told the story of a young boxer torn between love and ambition. But on that night, the story bent toward tragedy in a way no playwright could have written. In the middle of the performance, Greenwald clutched his chest and crumpled to the stage. The audience clapped, thinking it was a piece of convincing drama. They waited for him to rise, to deliver the next line. He never did. When the truth sank in, the theater fell into stunned silence. 2 decades later, in 1955, it was Isabel Bonner, an actress performing in the Shrike in Los Angeles. The play itself was grim, centered on mental illness, confinement, and despair. In the middle of a hospital scene, Bonner suddenly collapsed. Her fellow actors, perhaps thinking it was improvisation, hesitated, but the truth was far darker. Bonner had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. She was pronounced dead not long after. The irony was chilling. An actress portraying the struggles of mental breakdowns, only to lose her own life in the middle of that very role. And then came one of the most haunting moments in opera history. Leonard Warren, a beloved American baritone, was performing Verdi's La Forza del Destino at the Metropolitan Opera in 1960. The opera's very title means the force of destiny. That night, Warren sang with all the power audiences had come to expect. Then came the aria Urna Fatale del Mio Destino, Fatal Urn of My Destiny. He delivered it flawlessly. The applause roared. Moments later, he staggered, collapsed on stage, and never rose again. Think about that. A man singing about fate and death, struck down in the very moment of those words. The Met canceled the rest of the performance. To this day, opera historians whisper about that night, one of the rare times destiny seemed to write itself directly into the music. But Warren wasn't the only one lost that year. Just months later, actor Louis Jean Haidt collapsed during a Boston performance opposite Jane Fonda in There Was a Little Girl. He had finished his first scene, then quietly slumped backstage, never to return. And in 1961, the story repeated yet again. Actor Alan Marshall, a veteran performer, was on stage with none other than Mae West in the play Sextet. Audiences had come for laughter, for cheeky comedy, for Mae West's signature wit. Instead, the show was thrown into chaos when Marshall suffered a sudden heart attack and died during the run. It was becoming a pattern. Performers giving their all, night after night, under lights hotter than the sun, carrying the weight of expectation, and then, in the middle of their art, vanishing. The world of opera and drama has seen its share of these tragedies. But what about comedy? Surely laughter would protect performers from such fates. Surely the light-hearted world of humor was immune. It wasn't. In fact, when death struck comedy, it came in the most ironic, unsettling ways imaginable. Comedy turns dark. Comedy is supposed to be a safe space. The escape. You go to laugh, to forget, to feel alive. But for some comedians, the stage itself became the cruelest punchline. The year was 1976. Actor Sid James, best known for his roles in the Carry On films, was performing in the play The Mating Season in Sunderland, England. James, always the cheeky charmer, walked out onto the stage to deliver his lines. Moments later, he slumped in his chair, still smiling. The audience laughed. They thought it was part of the show. But the laughter quickly died when it became clear James wasn't acting. He had suffered a fatal heart attack, right there on stage. Just a few years later, tragedy struck again, this time, live on television. Tommy Cooper, the much-loved comedian-magician, was performing at London's Her Majesty's Theatre in 1984. Millions tuned in at home. In the middle of his act, Cooper suddenly collapsed. But here's the chilling part. His comedy was built around clumsiness, around pratfalls and awkward pauses. So when he fell, the audience roared with laughter. They thought it was part of the joke. Minutes ticked by before anyone realized he was truly in distress. By then, it was too late. That same year, another legend of British comedy fell. Eric Morecambe, one half of the iconic duo Morecambe and Wise, had just finished a charity performance in Tewkesbury. He took his final bow, waved, and walked off stage. Moments later, he collapsed. Despite frantic attempts to save him, Morecambe was gone. For his fans, it felt unthinkable. A man who had brought joy to millions, cut down in the very place he loved most. And then there was Dick Shawn, an American comedian best known for his wild, unpredictable stage shows. In 1987, Shawn was performing in San Diego. His routine included political satire and physical comedy, often involving sudden collapses as part of the act. So when he fell to the ground that night, the audience erupted with laughter. They clapped. They waited. Minutes passed. Slowly, horror spread through the crowd as they realized this wasn't a gag. Dick Shawn had died in front of them. The audience had applauded death itself. But perhaps the most haunting story of comedy's dark side came decades later. In 2019, veteran stand-up Ian Cognito was performing in Bicester, England. His style was abrasive, edgy, known for pushing boundaries. Mid-routine, he joked about what it would be like to die on stage. Minutes later, he slumped into his chair, silent. The audience, primed for shock humor, thought it was part of the act. They laughed, but he never got back up. Ian Cognito had died, moments after joking about it. What is it about comedy that makes these tragedies sting so deeply? Maybe it's the cruel irony of laughter disguising death. Maybe it's that audiences can't tell the difference because the line between acting and reality is so razor thin. And yet, even outside comedy, even into the modern day, the stage continues to demand lives. The curtain may be digital now, the lights brighter, the costumes more advanced, but the stage still claims its own. Modern echoes opera, drama, comedy. None of them are safe. And even in recent decades, the theater has continued to see tragedy unfold before unsuspecting audiences. In 1996, tenor Richard Versal stepped onto the stage at the Metropolitan Opera for Janacek's The Makropoulos Case. His role required him to climb a ladder, singing as he ascended. The line he delivered at that moment was chilling. "You can only live so long." Seconds later, Versala clutched his chest and fell to the stage floor. He had suffered a fatal heart attack. Those would be his last words that seemed to predict his own end. The opera was cancelled, but the memory of that night lives on in operatic infamy. In 2003, in London's Finborough Theatre, actor Gordon Reed was performing in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. The play itself is about waiting, about the inevitability of death, about futility. And in Act 2, Reed suddenly collapsed. The audience, already steeped in a play about despair, couldn't tell if it was performance or tragedy. The truth was immediate and final. He died before their eyes. And most recently, in 2024, in a quiet English town called Petersfield, tragedy struck again. Actor Julian Arnold was performing in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at a local theater festival. In the middle of a scene, he collapsed. Despite desperate efforts to save him, Arnold never regained consciousness. For a play about the fragile line between two selves, life and death, light and darkness, the irony was as heavy as the grief left behind. The truth is, these stories aren't rare accidents scattered across history. They are part of the DNA of performance. The stage is both a place of triumph and of danger. It asks for everything, and sometimes it takes more than anyone ever intended to give. Comment on which tragic deaths of famous people we should investigate next, and feel free to subscribe to support us.